Everyone's asking me the same questions. What's a chief digital officer? Why is this important right now? What do chief digital officers do? What sectors are they in? Where are they coming from? Are they coming from marketing, or are they coming from business development, or are they coming from tech? There have been a lot of articles on the Wall Street Journal, CIO Journal, obviously self-interest there at the CIO Journal, saying that there are a lot of chief digital officers who come from the CIO track. But I've been doing the research, and I've only seen a couple of them. Stephen Laster, famously, CIO of Harvard University, became in August Chief Digital Officer of McGraw-Hill Education. Even more famously was Stephen Gillette, who you probably all know was at Starbucks, did an incredible job there. We're going to get into some of the stuff that they've done at Starbucks with Adam Brotman as CDO. But he went and became President and Chief Digital Officer at Best Buy, and now is COO at Symantec. Gartner just came out with a report that said by 2015, 25% of all enterprises will have a chief digital officer. That's a pretty aggressive number, considering I think I'm the only one who's tracked it, and I've tracked a couple of hundred CDOs. To go from a couple of hundred to 25% of all enterprises in 2 years is extremely aggressive. The other interesting thing out of this report is that 90% of tech budgets are no longer going to be in IT at the end of the decade. At the end of the decade, 90%. That means the marketing people, other departments, other business units are going out. What's happening? They're going to Amazon Web Services. They're leveraging the cloud. They're using Radian 6 and Wildfire and Google's Wildfire. And the marketing team basically doesn't have to go to the IT department anymore to get analytics. They're doing it on their own. So the IT spend is migrating out of IT, right? So that's why I think you see these articles in the Wall Street Journal saying, hey, you know what, CIOs, you better reinvent yourself because you're basically being outsourced. Next point, Russell Reynolds. They came out with a report called The Rise of the CDO in November 2012. The number of CDO searches in Europe rose by 1/3 in the last 2 years. In the US, they've seen the same growth in half that time. And salaries for CDOs have doubled in the last 3 years. So there's a lot of CDOs in this room. And I've spoken to almost every CDO on the planet. I just want to see by a show of hands, how many CDOs were interviewed by Gartner in this room? None. How many CDOs were interviewed by Russell Reynolds? By a show of hands. One, Bernardo Rodriguez of Kaplan, right? Where do these people come up with these numbers? The fact is, I don't think they've interviewed anybody besides Bernardo. So I went out and I started mapping it. I interviewed 50 chief digital officers and others. I interviewed chief human resource officers, board directors, CEOs, the people who are tasked with hiring. I went out and I created this massive spreadsheet, of hundreds of chief digital officers, and I looked at about 20 different data points, some kind of interesting ones. Tons of surprises came out of this. Number one, look at all the sectors. There's CDOs in apparel. They're in retail. They're even, you could read them all. They're in sports, right? They're in beverages, everything from Starbucks, right? More interesting is the regulated industries, pharmaceutical, medical, insurance, banking. You wouldn't expect entrepreneurial innovators in these types of industries. Chief digital officers in almost everyone. Another question I get is, who are the superstars? What makes a superstar CDO? Well, you're all in this room. I would say they're all handsome, athletic, good-looking, playing to the choir. Just look around. What are the characteristics in general? But then again, let's look at by sector, because that's the most important. They're focused, but yet they're also flexible enough to change as market dictates. They're executors. These are people who have to deliver results. Let's face it, we don't have time anymore to mess around. Clearly, chief digital officers have to get buy-in from marketing, from IT, from tech, from the CIO, from business units. These are clearly relationship builders. They're leaders. They've got the respect of the board. They've got the respect of their peers and their subordinates. They're also managerial. They can bring in talent. Joe's another good example. Joe Billman basically parachutes into AMI and fills out his entire executive team within a couple of months, right? And now they're hitting the road running. And their digital revenues have increased. We'll talk to Joe about that. They're entrepreneurial, clearly. These are entrepreneurs. So the big question I get is, are they coming from IT? Are they CIOs? Absolutely not. We mapped out this space, went through all the data, and here are the results. 80% of them are men, 20% female. 91% white, so white men. Interesting if you look at it by industry. As I mentioned, advertising by far has more CDOs, 40% in advertising, by far the biggest group. Media and publishing are going neck and neck, so 15-15. And then the other space, which I think is going to be the biggest growth area, look, there's only how many media companies left standing? So there's not much growth there, right? Nonprofit. I believe that this space is going to explode, and here's why. We bundled into nonprofit three things. We bundled in nonprofits, government. Why is that a big space? Well, you know, you've got the Chief Digital Officer of New York City, Rachel Stern, who's doing a hell of a job, right? Do you all know Rachel Stern? You know, Chief Digital Officer here. Not just the city level. You've got a Chief Digital Officer in little towns like Gilbert, Arizona. She's making $89,000 a year, right, in a town. Rachel Stern, we all know, it's public information. She's making $129,000 a year at a city level. In Rhode Island, you just hired a Chief Digital Officer for the state of Rhode Island, Tom Guertin. Tom's making $188,000 a year. So you can see the range. That's why I hate it when I see like Russell Reynolds come out and say, you know, here's what a CDO makes. You know, there's a variance just in that sector alone, city, state, and town. I think every city will have a CDO. Brisbane, Australia, I want to say hi to John and Kieran O'Hay, who's the Chief Digital Officer in Brisbane, Australia. They're coming out with a digital roadmap. They just did a digital audit, and they've got a Chief Digital Officer in Brisbane, Australia. It's happening worldwide. It's not just in the United States. I think that space is going to explode. So these are more mature people. These aren't, look, these are not the social media kids. This isn't your nephew who's got a MySpace page. You know, social media, as a matter of fact, I should say, you know, I actually was going to track all of your Twitter followers. I was going to track your clout scores, but I didn't want to embarrass anyone, quite frankly. You know, but why? Well, Chief Digital Officers are not the guys doing, correct me if I'm wrong, they're not doing Twitter, they're not doing social. That's in marketing. That's a marketing function. That's outreach. That's trying to, right? Am I correct in that? So, you know, these guys are the ones who are reinventing the platform, creating new apps, mobile apps. How long have they been CDOs? An interesting stat. The majority of them, I would say 90%, have been CDOs for between 1 and 5 years. This is a brand new phenomenon, right? There haven't been many there, but now it's really starting to increase. Again, you can see the 3 to 5 year. Advertising is a lot further along. Interestingly enough, it started out in media. You had Jason Hirschhorn, famously his first CDO in 2005. You had George Kliavkoff, I think was NBC Universal in 2008 or 9, right? It was all happening in media, but in advertising it has really taken off. They've been exploding in growth. This is the media sector. So again, you can see 90% of it is in the last 5 years. And the nonprofit. This, again, that's why I say it's starting to ramp up. I really believe that this is going to see some significant growth. Publishing, we talked about. So where are they? Where in the world, you know, is Yeti? The majority of them are in the United States, but Europe is growing. You know, look, it's expected to grow. You know, this is not going to stop. In the United States alone, what's the geographical distribution? Obviously, most of this has happened in the Northeast Corridor. You know, the fact is Silicon Valley, do they have a need for a CDO? Look, what is this? I should take a step back. What is not a CDO? You know, you're never going to find a CDO at a digital native like a Netflix. That's like having a chief, I think Tom Helm said that's like having a chief radio officer at Clear Channel. You know, you don't need a chief digital officer at Google, right? So where is this right now? It's mostly in the Northeast, you know, big media companies. But, you know, you see that 16% on the West Coast. I can give you some of the names of the companies out there that are hiring. But I think, again, state and local government, those kinds of things. Now, this is a fascinating stat. This is, again, overall. 26% have MBAs, and, you know, a decent majority have JDs and, you know, PhDs. So these are bright people. Now, this, to me, is the most important stat. What's your career path? Most important stat to our CDOs in the room, right? What's your career path? Where do you go from here? And I think a lot of you have, you know, you've already evolved, but 36% were previously CDOs. Look where they went. 90%, I'd say 85% were C-suite president, became C-suite president or CEO. So, you know, what the theory was is actually playing out in the marketplace, that this is, you're not taking a step down after this if you're successful. If you're unsuccessful, you know. But then again, it's not your fault. It might not be your fault. It might be, you know, the turning radius. You can blame the turning radius. You can blame the evolution, you know. Plenty of places to place blame. I thought this was an interesting stat. We did kind of a cross look at gender. So this is the distribution by gender. 88% male in advertising. Jane, how do you feel about that? Jane Barrett, COO, McGarry Bowen. Yeah, it's horrible. But it seems to be white men in their 40s and 50s. So interesting stats there. I love the nonprofit sector. You know, we got Perry Hewitt here from the university, from Harvard. We've got Christine Montgomery from Center for Public Integrity. Linda Perry-Lube, who used to be Chief Digital Officer of American Museum of Natural History, is now CDO at RF Binder. So a lot of women in that nonprofit sector, universities, government, on and on, okay? Another interesting stat, racial distribution. Look at publishing, you know? So white guys field, or, you know, what's going on here? 100% white. Again, in the nonprofit sector, you see a lot more diversity. We've got Robert Gordon here, who's Chief Digital Officer for America's Promise. Please meet with Robert when you have a chance. That's Colin Powell has helped start that up. So we've got some diversity happening in the nonprofit sector. So we're going to look at advertising, publishing, media, and nonprofit. Geographical distribution for the advertising sector, a little bit more spread out. A couple more overseas. You got Peony Wu, Chief Digital Officer for Ogilvy in China. You got, I think, Brandon Berger or Nick Nyhan, Chief Digital Officer. Is he in London, I believe? Yeah, so, you know, you got some stuff going on overseas, especially in advertising. Interesting in advertising, I went over this with Jane, you know, not many MBAs. This is a creative field, so it's obvious. There's a lot of BAs, a lot of BFAs, you know, Bachelor of Fine Arts, a lot of MAs. This is a creative industry, so they're not the MBAs, but again, interesting. If you're hiring a CDO and you want somebody in the advertising sector, look in the creative fields. In advertising, again, to me, this is the most important stat. What's the career path? 45% were previously CDOs, and again, like 80% became president, CEO, or jumped into the C-suite, or became a managing director or a partner. Again, this is not, you know, if you do well, you're going up to the board level. A little bit more diversity in media, majority between 30 and 60 years old. Interesting in media, geographic distribution. Some of the big media companies right here. Obviously, again, that goes to Comcast, which is in Philly. Now I think they moved to Stanford, Connecticut. NBC News right here at 30 Rock. 27%, a lot outside of the U.S. Media, education, some surprises there were the MBAs and the JDs and the advanced degrees in media. In media, again, a lot of these folks jumping up into the president, CEO, to C-suite. Now look at publishing, and again, just for fact, publishing is folks like Wenner, Simon & Schuster, Scholastic, HarperCollins, McGraw-Hill. Good diversity there, you know, 30% female, we like to see that. And a lot of JDs and a lot of MBAs. That was surprising to me. Higher than any other sector. There were a lot of MBAs in that one. And as well, look at the numbers here. I mean, clearly, if you're doing well, you're going to be president, CEO, board, on and up. And now I think probably the most interesting, again, I believe we're going to see growth here. Good diversity, gender and race. You know, again, the same numbers. They're looking for mature people. They're not looking for kids. 83% in the Northeast. I think that's kind of surprising. I really think that's going to start to expand, not just in the U.S., but abroad. And as I mentioned, you got a guy named Kieran O'Hay, who's Chief Digital Officer for Brisbane. Interestingly enough, he's Irish. They imported him to Australia from Ireland, and they were lucky to get him. He's a great guy. So, Kieran, best of luck to you in Brisbane. So where do we get these people? Where do we find them? What do we got to pay to get these people? You know what they're making in government. That's easy to find. So confidentially, a lot of you have shared your salary with me, and we'll keep that confidential, but clearly in the publishing space, we're seeing salaries, depending on where you are, anywhere between $250,000 to $700,000. The public stuff was Randall Rothenberg. You all probably remember. He went from IAB, jumped into Time, lasted all of 6 months, made $600,000, went back to IB, right? So the numbers get up there. I've seen everything between, you know, again, $200,000 to $500,000. You know, I hope to do this summit, you know, every year. It seems very media and publishing focused. We could have had a whole retail sector. You got Jim Barr, CDO at OfficeMax. You got CDO Adam Brotman, CDO at Starbucks. You know, all of these people should be here. Rachel Stern, Tom Guertin from Rhode Island. All of these people should be here representing the government sector, and we certainly hope that we can do that next time. These are all obvious. There's chief digital officers at almost every one of these companies. Here's the sort of, you know, non-obvious ones, or if you're around long enough, they are obvious, but in universities like Harvard and Columbia and MIT, even Ryan Seacrest has a chief digital officer. That's why he's there. And where are they? Well, you know what? They're at Yelp. They're at Google. The next generation of chief digital officers are entrepreneurial, innovators, P&L driven. They're product managers. They're not technical. They're business people. And this is where you're going to get them. The challenge is, how do you get them out? The other place you can find CDOs are, I started a chief digital officer group on LinkedIn. And I'm really, thanks to everybody for joining. If you haven't joined, you should, if you're a CDO. We had 140 CDOs. It's like more than 60% of every CDO on earth in that group.
In instances where the CDO is not reporting to the CEO, where are they reporting?
Right, and that's the worst possible scenario. Like the ones that are successful are reporting to the board, they report into the CDO, they get the buy-in from the board. You're setting it up to fail if you're not. That should be a prerequisite for the job if you're parachuting into a company that's hiring a CDO. Where they're not, there's usually failure, and usually the CDO leaves very upset. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't mean to speak for you all. Is this correct? Yeah, I mean, you got to have buy-in from the top, or the company's going to be unhappy and the CDO is going to be unhappy. Thanks, Janet. I should say also, if I'm parachuting into a company and I'm going to be a CDO there, I want to know, what's the budget? What's my head count? Do I have P&L responsibility? Are we doing this system-wide? Let's look at an example from Square. Everybody know the Square deal? A lot of you do, right? But so Square, for everybody who doesn't know, Starbucks does this great deal with Square, Jack Dorsey's company. And everybody, I think the press portrays this as two entrepreneurs sitting down, over a coffee or a latte, shake hands, we got this great deal, right? So the deal is Square you get to be able to use Square on your phone to make purchases at every Starbucks or select Starbucks locations. It's part of the Series D funding round. I think it was a $25 million round. So the CEO of Starbucks gets a seat on the board of Square. And that's the way the press portrays it. The background to this story is fascinating, because this is what I mean about the CDO working hand in hand with infrastructure. What happened was, truly, Stephen Gillette was CIO at Starbucks before he became CDO. Sorry, he was CIO at Starbucks before he became CDO at Best Buy. What Gillette did was brilliant. He reinvented the entire architecture for point of sale. They had this outdated cash register system, literally ka-ching, ka-ching, enter. And he revamped the entire back end, right? So now you can do a deal with Square. Are your companies set up to do those kinds of deals? That's what a CDO, I don't mean to get too excited about this, but that's what a CDO should be doing. System-wide changes, platform changes, so you can plug in a mobile app, you can plug in these kinds of deals. Without that kind of vision, without the buy-in of the CIO who's in charge of the back end and point of sale and retail point of purchase, you're not going to be able to do a deal like that. So to me, those are the kinds of things I like, those are the kinds of things that are really exciting. And if you're, reporting into a business unit, that's a problem with, so let's take a look at what's happening right now and what should happen. What's happened up to now is you've got all these ad hoc, fragmented, just like IT spending is happening in marketing, right? So they're doing all these little things, but that doesn't scale. As we did this at Reuters, right? I mean, we did these little things, but at some point you got to scale this up to the whole organization and be able to plug things onto that platform. That's exciting. So it wasn't Jack Dorsey and Adam Brotman sitting down and doing a handshake. This took years, it took vision, it took dedication, it took financing, and it took the board approval to do it. And that to me is the exciting space. But correct me if I'm wrong. I may be way off. I don't want to speak for you all. Sorry to get so excited about that one. Yep. Perry.
You spoke to involved in strategic planning at that level, to the extent it touches things like HR. Who are the people we hire to operationalize and scale the strategic initiatives the CDOs get involved in?
Right. That's a great question. I think it's happening right here in New York City, right? The question is, are they doing this system-wide? And that's why I stay away from, when I don't make any assumptions on the chief digital officer is tasked with 4 things. 1, increasing revenues. 2, decreasing costs. 3, improving customer service. 4, whatever that might be. Because in a university setting, you don't care about increasing, like there's some thought to increasing curriculum, online learning, and those kinds of things. So when I think of Rachel Stern here in New York City, I think exactly what you're talking about, right? They're trying to improve communication between the constituents and their government officials. They're trying to put routers in subways to improve your connectivity with your cell phones when you're in difficult places. They want to make sure that you're ready for any emergency alerts. It's an entire system-wide strategy that has very little to do with a silo and more to do with a long-term vision for an entire city, a city of the future, where people don't have to commute. And I would take a step back. Look, to me, this isn't about a title. CDO, great. Who cares? It's not even about a company or an organization. This is about a change in lifestyle, a complete change in the way that we do business. With digital, you can now work remotely, contrary to what Marissa Meyer might say. You can, you're going to cut down on pollution. You're going to cut down on plastic that you put on the bins at retail stores for music, right? You're downloading things now. You don't have to jump in your car to get to work. This is a major transformation. It's not about like, oh yeah, we got to increase our digital revenues as a percentage of our revenues from print. That's one thing, but it's a very small, a very limited perspective about what we have going on here. And, I applaud you and the things you're doing at Harvard. Perry will be on an education panel with Sri Srinivasan from Columbia and Bernardo from Kaplan. Thanks. Yeah. Is that Margaret Malloy? Margaret Malloy was named one of the top CMOs to watch on Twitter ahead of the CMO from GE. Thanks, Margaret.
Hi, David. Quick question. What is the biggest skill gap or deficit CDOs have when they're moving to this role?
Right. It's a good question, and that's why, again, I always go by sector, right? So, like for advertising, when I looked, I got the numbers right here, when I looked in advertising, what advertising, and again, Jane can jump in and correct me, but what I've seen is they're looking for people who have digital marketing skills, digital strategy, brand awareness, conversions. How do we get more eyeballs to our site, our client site, Coca-Cola, wherever it might be? Then how do we get them to convert? Analytics, the most important thing, big data. What do we do with all this data we now have? It's not just about saying, oh, this is a person who's 50 years old and drives a Taurus. We need to now engage that person in a conversation. It's not just about raw numbers. It's about the humanity behind it in there as well. Social media, activation, increased engagement. And that's why I say you got to break it down by sector, because then when you go into media, completely different skills that people require. Companies are looking for people who have app development. David Payne, some others here can probably correct me. But in media, you need to know about e-commerce. You need to know about interactive advertising. You need to know about conversions, transferring analog data to digital, and how does that relate to disrupting our own business. So completely different skill set than advertising. Even in advertising, I like to keep advertising on the side completely, because it's the one field where you do need social chops. You do need to know how to build a Facebook following, how to build a Twitter following, how to get more likes to your Facebook page. Whereas folks in media are not necessarily looking at that, because the CMO does that. That's a very clear distinction I want to make, right? This is Facebook, Twitter, all those things. They're marketing. They're outreach. They're not building apps, getting a platform together.
Hi, Allison Corcoran from Staples. I'm intrigued by your comment. It seems to indicate that most successful CDOs in at least for-profit companies don't seem to own a P&L. Is that what you're saying, that instead they are operating in a sort of cross-business unit role with a different set of objectives, or are they also P&L owners?
In the beginning being 3 to 5 years ago, they weren't in charge of P&L. They had no teeth in the position. Well, majority had no teeth in the position. Nobody respected them. They were ostracized. They had to be a real ability to get stakeholders involved. And now I think that has evolved. And again, depends on the company, depends on the sector, depends on the evolution and the turning radius. But what we're starting to see now is you really do need to have P&L responsibility. I wouldn't, if I was jumping in as a CDO, I wouldn't take the job if they didn't give me P&L. I want to see that my digital revenues are increasing. whether it's at the expense of existing or it's new, it still needs to, I want to make sure that, because you're building a business. That's why I say, again, these are entrepreneurs, and you're trying to build that business. So I think that's changing, and I think it's changing for the better. That's an important component.